Brexit barriers, fears that a new border in Ireland could reignite old divisions. And we'll examine the threat to cross-border trade, a mainstay of the Irish economy. I'm Martin Stanford. This is Insight. Hello and welcome to Insight. Ireland is trying to prepare for Brexit amid fears that the creation of a hard border between North and South could have devastating consequences for its political and economic future. Britain's decision to quit Europe will leave Ireland as the only place in the EU which is physically joined to the UK, raising questions about the movement of goods and people between the two countries which share one island. Later in the programme, we'll examine what that could mean for trade. But first, Insight's Ty Genwright has been examining fears that a new border could also reignite old sectarian divides.
From high above, South Armagh appears like a pretty picture. Mother Nature knows no borders, but there is a barely visible frontier here between Ireland's two jurisdictions, and very ugly memories of its recent history. Only 20 years ago, this was a war zone. British Army lookouts kept watch over the place then known as the Badlands, where police feared to tread and border patrols were fodder for terrorist snipers. The last to be shot and killed here was in 1997.
It was a calculated, premeditated murder of a person going about his work.
The border between Ireland's north and south wasn't just a symbol of the island's division, it also offered a target for terrorists and a strategic opportunity to escape justice. So in the 1970s, the British Army destroyed many of the roads and bridges that crossed it.
Clear the area, 2 minutes.
Today, the only watchtowers that remain are artistic interpretations of the past. Ireland's peace process has rebuilt, the bridges broken by violence.
When you cross the Irish border today, it's a case of blink and you might miss it. There's no security, no checkpoint. You are crossing from one county to another, and that's all it feels like. Certainly not like you're moving from one country to the next.
But Brexit could spell an end to all that. The UK as a whole voted to leave the EU, even if most in Northern Ireland voted to stay. That poses a difficult question about how to manage the new border that Brexit will create.
In Ulster's border town of Newry, troops prepare to seal off all streets leading into the town against civil rights marches.
Just north of the border, Newry is a town whose fortunes are closely linked to it. It was in the past a flashpoint of Northern Ireland's troubles. Since the border became open, life has become a lot more normal here, and most don't want it to return.
No, definitely no hard border.
I don't think people in the south would like it, and I definitely don't think the people down here would like it. We don't want to go back to those days, no.
Is there a chance it could stoke up, tensions or violence again?
I just hope and pray not. No, we don't want to go back to that at all.
When Theresa May says there'll be no return to the hard borders of the past, Theresa May wouldn't know a hard border if it jumped up and bit her on the nose. She hasn't a clue what she's talking about.
This district's leaders want to make it more attractive for visitors and investors. A new border won't help that.
We need to work together to make sure that it's the least impact. We need to make sure that, in fact, people want to come here even more.
Are you confident that the concerns of this community are going to be listened to or will really figure in the process?
I'm concerned that they're not going to be listened to, and that's why we will be lobbying very hard. And we need Theresa May to listen to the fact that we have to have a say on this. It's our futures.
In January, a police officer was shot when a gunman opened fire with an automatic weapon in Belfast.
Our main line of inquiry at the minute is violent dissident Republicans.
Terrorists are no longer holding Ireland to ransom, but they've not gone away.
There are small groups of Republican terrorists that are still operational around the Irish border. These people are well armed, they're well equipped, they have bomb-making capabilities. They're constantly planning and training and preparing to mount terrorist attacks in the border region.
So why exactly does a new border pose a threat?
It will be seen as a symbol of the British government reasserting itself in what is a sort of an unpoliced area to a large intents and purposes. Then you have the people that are deployed there, the customs officials, police officers, who have to man checkpoints. They themselves will become targets and inevitably will be attacked at some stage.
Which presents a huge dilemma for London, Brussels and Dublin, all of those involved in the Brexit negotiations.
There's a lot of debate with politicians saying they can have a soft border or maybe a hard border. The fact of the matter is, if you talk to people in the military or the police or customs service, they will say you either have a border or you don't. And I haven't heard any explanation or any plan on how they're going to address these issues, and I'm not sure they have one.
Northern Ireland is voting again. A snap election is underway after its cross-community leaders fell out, putting their power-sharing peace deal in doubt.
It's a big crisis.
The Irish peace process is often held up as a success story for others to copy, but it's also shown how easily progress can be undone. Both the governments in Britain and the Irish Republic, and both sides of the old divide here in Northern Ireland, say they recognise how important it is to preserve the sense of openness between the north and south of Ireland.
We'll have to find a very creative solution if the UK is determined to close its door on the European Union and yet keep its only land border with it unguarded. Ty Genwright reporting for Insight on the Irish border.
Well, joining me now in the studio is John Crowley, the editor-in-chief at the International Business Times and a former news editor at the Irish Post newspaper. There's nothing like Donald Trump's proposed wall. It's much shorter, but it's equally almost ridiculous to propose, isn't it? Because of the nature of the countryside along which the 300 miles treads.
Yes, so it's a 310-mile border, but the EU, which will have to, when Britain decides to leave for Brexit, will have to enforce, the single market. What are they going to do? So this is one of the options that is up for discussion, but obviously with the history of the border, the troops, I remember as a young boy passing through there. It was a horrible experience. So I think it's Michael Barnier, who was leading the discussions at the EU, says, this is not up for discussion at the moment, but
most people
the potential's
think
there.
it is so impractical to suggest a hard border where every transition of every person and every vehicle is logged in some way or monitored in some way, that it's even not worth countenancing. Is that where most people come from?
Well, yeah, most people would say that. There's 40,000 people that cross the border each day. During a month, 1.7 million cars pass through, 200,000 vans, 200,000 lorries. There's people going back and forth. So yes, how are you going to police this? But the argument that people from the EU might say is like, well, we have to maintain the sanctity of the single market. How are you going to do it? Setting that against the backdrop of the Troubles, when you had the watchtowers, when you had the troops stopping people, and I remember that as a young boy in the 1980s, kind of passing through that border where, I'd be on the bus with my nana and my mum, and they'd be frog marching these old ladies off, looking through the bus, looking under the seats. If that happened again, this is the extreme we're talking about, but if that happened again, that would go down extremely badly with the nationalist community.
But also the security force, whatever it turned out to be, whether it was British policemen, whether it was a combined force, whatever it was, that symbol of the border and how you cannot pass but you can would surely be a target by those who either want to retain the north for the British, exclusively so, or for those in the south, predominantly, who want the whole of the island of Ireland to be one nation. And I don't want to incite violence in any way, but it's not a big step to suggest it might return.
No, it's not. So it seems a long way away now. So the Good Friday Agreement, 1998, you know, the auspices of the Good Friday Agreement put this in place where people could kind of pass freely. But
free movement of people.
Free movement of people and services. But, you know, that was hard won, yeah, by the politicians, not by, you know, that was done at the ballot box, so to speak. That was hard won. That can be easily lost. And you look at all the crazy things that have happened over the past 12 months. It sounds ridiculous to say, you know, could there be troops back on the border again? Yeah. It seems unlikely. Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, has said this will not happen, but it may not be her decision. Mm. If there's a disorderly Brexit, say, for instance, you know, this may be one of the things up for discussion.
I wonder if technology could come to the rescue. The Sweden, Norway, I think some of their borders, or certainly for motor traffic, they just log it electronically, which vehicles pass from one to the other. Could that be sort of applied in a solution where it stays soft border, but there is an electronic monitoring of who's going where?
OK, I don't think the technology is quite caught up with the numbers of people that are passing back and forth, as we said.
Sheer volume of transport.
As I said, you know, nearly 2 million cars passing through a month, 40,000 people every day. You've got all, you know, Northern Ireland and the Republic, it's crisscrossed with kind of little alleys, streams. You know, I know that. I kind of used to trample across them in my childhood. It's very difficult to police. So to think that there's some kind of technology or some satellite that's going to track everything there is hard to imagine.
If that's not going to work, what about the solution which many might say, OK, let's have a united Ireland. Let's draw right round, you know, the island of Ireland. Mm-hmm. Let's treat that as the EU. And then we've got the sea dividing us between independent Great Britain.
Yes, the unionist community might have something to
They might have something to object about that. But that might be a practical way forward.
It's a practical way, but as ever in Northern Ireland, you've got to have, you know, both communities on board. You know, we've got recent elections this week that are being held. One of the interesting things about these recent elections is that it needs the two largest parties to form a government, i.e. two people, both from the Catholic...
They're most likely to be returned, we think, don't we?
They are most likely to be returned, but the two largest parties are generally going to be one from the Catholic and one from the Protestant community. So the DUP, which mostly represents Protestants, and Sinn Féin, which has now become the most popular nationalist party. But no, the Unionists would have something extremely strong to say about that issue. What is interesting, in partition in the early 1920s, 2/3 of the community was Protestant. That is getting a lot closer now. And although, you know, discussions of, you know, forming United Ireland aren't kind of on the table just yet, they're looking over at Scotland with devolution. We had, you know, there was a referendum a few years ago. That question is on the table again. So it's there, it's hanging in the background, but...
it's extraordinary. The consequences of Brexit, a lot of it still to be resolved, John.
Absolute ripple effects.
Well, let's continue that in just a moment. You're watching Insight. Coming up, as the UK prepares to leave the EU, what impact would a hard border have on the multi-million-dollar trade between North and South?